They called me difficult for not signing off on their shortcut. Then they demoted me 2 weeks before launch, not realizing I still held the encryption key. The code mine. The launch delayed indefinitely. My name's Isla Warren, and what they thought was just a power play turned into a $120 million disaster. I still remember the exact shade of blue in the Denver sky the day everything changed. April in Colorado always brings that crisp, thin mountain air that makes the heavens seem impossibly close. I'd been at Tide Grove Systems for just under 3 years then, and from my corner office on the 32nd floor, I could see the jagged line of the Rockies cutting across the horizon like a promise. A promise of stability I'd foolishly believed in. My name is Isla Warren. I'm 34 years old, and until recently, I was the chief software engineer at Tide Grove Systems, a financial technology company that was supposed to revolutionize payment processing with our platform. Aegis Pay, I designed it, I built it, and when they tried to cut corners with people's financial security, I took it back. Let me tell you how a $120 million launch imploded, and why I don't regret being the one who struck the match. I'm not someone who enjoys conflict. That's the first thing you should know about me. I prefer the elegant solutions of code, the beautiful logic of well-designed systems. People are messy. Software doesn't have to be. Give me a quiet room, a difficult problem, and enough coffee, and I'll build you something extraordinary. That's exactly what Tide Grove hired me to do 3 years ago, when their previous security architecture collapsed like a house of cards. The day CEO Marcus Tidwell recruited me, his company was bleeding from a $28 million security breach. Customer data exposed, financial information compromised, stock in free fall. Their previous system had more holes than a sieve, and someone had finally poured water through it. Marcus was desperate, and I was exactly what he needed: a security specialist with an obsessive attention to detail and an almost pathological commitment to protecting user data. We need someone who won't compromise, he told me during our first meeting, his normally confident voice edged with desperation. Someone who understands that in fintech, security isn't just a feature, it's the foundation. I liked him immediately. Liked his frankness, his willingness to admit the company's failures. He wasn't trying to minimize what had happened or blame it on anyone else. And when my demands for complete architectural control and an intellectual property clause protecting my core encryption modules seemed excessive, he didn't blink. If that's what it takes to make this right, you've got it, he said, sliding the amended contract across the table. The clause stated clearly that my core encryption architecture remained my intellectual property, licensed to Tide Grove for as long as I remained in a senior technical position. If I was terminated or demoted without documented technical cause, the license would be revocable. It wasn't standard, but nothing about the situation was standard. Tide Grove needed a miracle, and miracles don't come with standard terms. For almost 3 years, it worked beautifully. I rebuilt their entire backend from scratch, designing a system I called Aegis Pay, a nod to the protective shield of Zeus in Greek mythology. It used a multi-layered authentication system with real-time fraud detection that was years ahead of anything else in the market. The architecture was elegant, secure, and completely mine. I kept the encryption keys in a personal hardware token, a physical device about the size of a credit card that I carried with me at all times. Without it, the system would still function. But the most sensitive operations, those involving actual money transfers, would fail. It was security by design, not security by obscurity. Under my guidance, Tide Grove didn't just recover, it thrived. We secured 5 major contracts with banks and insurance companies. Our system processed over $2 billion in transactions monthly. Without a single security incident, the company that had been on the verge of collapse was now preparing for an IPO valued at approximately $600 million. And then they hired Brent Holloway. Brent came in as the new COO, brought on specifically to streamline operations before the IPO. His resume was impressive: Harvard MBA, successful exits from 3 previous startups, a reputation for delivering results. What it didn't mention was his willingness to sacrifice anything, including security, to hit a deadline. Our first meeting should have been a warning. We sat in the glass-walled conference room overlooking downtown Denver, the spring sunlight streaming through the windows, as Brent outlined his vision for accelerating our go-to-market strategy. The Aegis Pay launch is our cornerstone, he said, pacing the room with the energy of someone who measured his worth in quarterly growth percentages. But June is our window. The market is hot, our competitors are scrambling, and we need to strike now. I nodded, thinking he was simply emphasizing the importance of our timeline, a timeline we were on track to meet, assuming our final security testing phase went as planned. The security testing phase, he continued, stopping to fix me with what I'm sure he thought was a persuasive stare, is excessive. 6 weeks is an eternity in this market. We need to trim it down to 2, maybe less. The room went quiet. I remember thinking I must have misheard him. The 6-week testing phase is non-negotiable, I said, keeping my voice even. We're handling people's financial data. The system needs to be tested at maximum load to ensure data integrity under stress. Brent's smile didn't waver, but something in his eyes hardened. Isla, I understand your concern for security. It's commendable. But let's be realistic, our competitors launch with far less testing. We're leaving money on the table. Our competitors haven't built what we've built, I countered. And several of them have had breaches. That's not a model I'm willing to follow. The meeting went downhill from there. What started as a discussion quickly became an argument, with Brent insisting that I was being unnecessarily cautious and me refusing to budge on what I knew was a fundamental security requirement. Look, he finally said, his facade of collegiality cracking. I appreciate that you're dedicated to your craft, but sometimes perfect is the enemy of good enough. We need to be nimble. And I need to ensure that people's financial information is protected. I replied, that was the entire point of rebuilding this system. When I left that meeting, I thought it was just a disagreement, the kind that happens in any company when different departments have different priorities. I didn't realize it was the beginning of the end. Over the next few weeks, Brent systematically undermined me. In meetings, he would question my timelines, suggesting that I was being overly conservative. He began scheduling technical discussions without inviting me, then presenting decisions as if they'd been made by consensus. When I raised concerns about cutting the testing phase, he accused me of not being a team player and failing to see the bigger picture. I tried to rally support among the other executives, but Brent had been busy there too. He'd painted me as difficult, inflexible, someone who might jeopardize the IPO with my perfectionism. Even Marcus, who had once valued my uncompromising approach to security, began to waver. Isla, I understand your concerns, he said during one particularly tense meeting, not quite meeting my eyes. But Brent makes some valid points about market timing. Perhaps we could find a middle ground. There is no middle ground with security, I insisted. Either we do it right, or we're setting ourselves up for another breach. The final blow came on a Tuesday morning, 2 weeks before our scheduled launch. I was called into Marcus's office, where he and Brent waited with carefully neutral expressions. Isla, Marcus began, we've decided to make some organizational changes to better align with our go-to-market strategy. I knew what was coming before he said it. We're restructuring your role to technical consultant, he continued. You'll still be instrumental in the launch, but Brent will be taking over direct management of the engineering team. This will free you up to focus on what you do best. Brent added with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The technical details without having to worry about the business aspects. It was a demotion, plain and simple, and it triggered the clause in my contract, the one that protected my intellectual property if I was demoted without technical cause. They had either forgotten about that clause or assumed it wouldn't matter. After all, the code was already written. The system was nearly ready to launch, and they probably thought they could smooth things over with me after the fact. What they didn't understand was that without my encryption key, without my ongoing license of the core security modules, their entire system was built on borrowed time. I nodded calmly, accepting the news with a composure that seemed to relieve them both. As I left Marcus's office, I heard Brent say, I told you she'd be reasonable about this. He had no idea. Back in my office, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to my lawyer, confirming what I already knew: the demotion had triggered the IP clause in my contract. The second was to a trusted friend in the industry, someone who could help me navigate what came next. The third was to my mother, who had always told me never to let anyone make me compromise my principles. Then I drafted my resignation letter. It was brief, professional, and included a formal notice of license revocation for my proprietary encryption modules. I scheduled it to be delivered automatically in 24 hours, giving me time to gather my personal belongings and prepare for the storm that would follow. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the balcony of my apartment, watching the lights of Denver shimmer against the darkness, and questioned everything. Was I being petty vindictive? Was I overreacting to what was essentially a corporate power play? But then I thought about what was at stake. This wasn't about my pride or my position. It was about the promise I'd made to build something secure, something people could trust with their financial lives. Cutting the testing phase would put that at risk, and I wasn't willing to have my name on something that might fail. The next morning, I went to work as usual. I nodded to colleagues, responded to emails, attended a team meeting where Brent announced my exciting new role with corporate doublespeak that made several engineers exchange worried glances. No one mentioned my resignation letter because no one had seen it yet. At 5:00 p.m., exactly 24 hours after my demotion, the automated email was delivered to Marcus, Brent, the board of directors, and the legal department. By 5:05, my phone was ringing. It was Marcus. "Isla." "What is this?" he demanded, the calm diplomacy of yesterday completely gone. "You can't just revoke the license to code that's integral to our system." "Actually, I can," I replied. "It's all in the contract you signed. My encryption architecture remains my intellectual property. Licensed to Tide Grove only under specific conditions that were violated yesterday." "This is absurd," he spluttered. "We're 2 weeks from launch. We have contracts worth millions riding on this." "I'm aware," I said. "I tried to tell you that cutting the security testing was a mistake. Now you have a more immediate problem." The call ended with Marcus demanding I come to his office immediately. I declined, citing the fact that, as of my resignation, I was no longer obligated to be on premises. Instead, I reminded him that my personal authentication token would expire in 14 days, at which point the system would lose access to the encryption modules unless, of course, they were willing to reinstate me and commit to the full testing schedule. For the next 48 hours, my phone buzzed constantly with calls and messages. Brent left increasingly threatening voicemails. The legal department sent emails insisting that my claim to the IP was invalid. It wasn't. Several board members reached out directly, alternating between appeals to my loyalty and thinly veiled threats about my future in the industry. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I consulted with my lawyer, who confirmed that my position was legally sound. The contract had been carefully worded, and Tide Grove's only options were to either meet my terms or rebuild the entire encryption architecture from scratch, something that would take months, not weeks. On the third day, the tone of the communications changed. Marcus requested a meeting. Just to talk. I agreed, but insisted it be held on neutral ground, a coffee shop downtown, with my lawyer present. When I arrived, Marcus looked like he hadn't slept in days. The confident CEO had been replaced by a man who was watching his company's future crumble before his eyes. "Isla," he said, skipping any pretense of small talk. "We made a mistake. I made a mistake. I let Brent convince me that the timeline was more important than the process, and I shouldn't have." I waited, saying nothing. "We want you back," he continued. "Full reinstatement as chief software engineer, complete control over the testing phase, whatever timeline you think is necessary." It was everything I'd asked for, but I hesitated. The trust had been broken, not just in me, but in the company's commitment to security. "And Brent?" I asked. Marcus looked pained. "He's valuable to the company in many ways, but not when it comes to security decisions," I said firmly. After a long pause, Marcus nodded. Not when it comes to security decisions. You'll have final say on anything related to the system architecture and testing protocols. We hammered out the details over the next hour, with my lawyer ensuring everything was properly documented. I would return to Tide Grove the next day. The full 6-week testing phase would proceed as originally planned, and I would have explicit veto power over any decisions that might impact system security. When I walked into the office the following morning, the atmosphere was strained. Some colleagues greeted me warmly, clearly relieved that the launch was back on track. Others, particularly those aligned with Brent, were cold, viewing me as someone who had held the company hostage. Brent himself avoided me entirely, which was fine by me. We had nothing to say to each other. The testing phase began immediately. And it's a good thing it did. Under maximum load simulation, we discovered 3 critical vulnerabilities that could have compromised data integrity during high-volume transactions. Had we launched without fixing them, it would have been the previous security breach all over again, perhaps worse. When I presented these findings at the executive meeting, I didn't say, "I told you so." I didn't have to. The data spoke for itself, and even Brent remained silent as I outlined the fixes we were implementing. The launch was delayed by 5 weeks, but when Aegis Pay finally went live, it was rock solid. The contracts were secured, the clients were satisfied, and the path to the IPO was clear once again. I stayed at Tide Grove for another 6 months, long enough to ensure that Aegis Pay was running smoothly and the company's security culture was firmly established. During that time, Brent's influence waned. His push for speed over stability had nearly cost the company everything. And while Marcus didn't fire him outright, he was gradually sidelined from major decisions. When I finally did leave Tide Grove, it was on my own terms. I had proven my point, protected my principles, and preserved my reputation as someone who wouldn't compromise on security. Several companies approached me with offers, but I had a different vision in mind. With the knowledge and experience I'd gained at Tide Grove, I founded my own company, CipherLoom, a security-first payment platform built on decentralized encryption. Within a year, we had signed contracts with 2 former Tide Grove prospects, including one of the major banks that had been hesitant about the rushed timeline. As for Tide Grove, they completed their IPO, though at a valuation somewhat lower than the originally projected $600 million. Brent left the company shortly after, moving on to another startup where, hopefully, he learned the lesson that shortcuts in security always cost more in the long run. Marcus and I occasionally meet for coffee, a relationship that evolved from adversarial to respectful. He once admitted that the standoff over the encryption modules was the most expensive lesson in listening to technical experts he'd ever received. I don't tell this story to gloat. I tell it because in an industry obsessed with speed and scale, someone needs to stand up for security and integrity. Sometimes that means being willing to walk away from something you've built, rather than seeing it launched before it's ready. They called me difficult. They demoted me. They thought they could launch without me. What they forgot was that I had built the foundation their entire system stood upon. And foundations matter. The code was mine, and so was the final say in how it would be used. They thought they fired me. Turns out, they just unplugged their own system. And that $120 million launch. It happened eventually, but only after they learned that when it comes to security, there are no shortcuts. My name is Isla Warren, and this is just the beginning of my story. The midday sun streams through the floor-to-ceiling windows of CipherLoom's headquarters, illuminating the open workspace where my team of engineers, predominantly women, a deliberate choice on my part, are building what will become the next generation of secure payment processing. 3 years have passed since the Tide Grove incident, as it's now commonly referred to in industry circles. CipherLoom has grown from a one-woman operation run out of my apartment to a 50-person company with a valuation approaching $200 million. More importantly, we've become known as the gold standard for security in financial transactions, the company that never compromises on protecting user data. My phone vibrates with an incoming call. The screen displays a number I recognize immediately, though I haven't seen it in months. "Marcus," I answer, leaning back in my chair. "It's been a while." Isla, he says, his voice carrying the same confident tone I remember, though perhaps with a new edge of humility. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. Not at all. What can I do for you? There's a pause, the kind that precedes something significant. I have a proposition for you, he finally says. Tide Grove would like to acquire the rights to the Aegis Pay encryption architecture, permanently this time. I'm not surprised. Tide Grove has been struggling to maintain the system without me, patching and updating it rather than undertaking the massive task of rebuilding from scratch. I see, I reply neutrally. And what are you offering? 8.7 million, he says without hesitation. Plus a seat on our board. We recognize the value of what you created, Isla. And we've learned our lesson about the importance of security-first development. It's a generous offer, more than fair from a purely financial perspective. But Cypherloom has moved far beyond the architecture I designed for Tide Grove. We're breaking new ground with fully decentralized encryption that makes Aegis Pay look almost primitive by comparison. I appreciate the offer, Marcus, I say carefully, but I'm afraid I'll have to decline. What I built for Tide Grove belongs to that chapter of my life, and that chapter is closed. He tries to negotiate, of course. The offer rises to 10 million, then 12, but my answer remains the same. Some things aren't about money, they're about principles, about moving forward rather than looking back. Later that week, a technology magazine reaches out for an interview. They're doing a feature on women in cybersecurity, and my name has come up repeatedly as someone who stood her ground in a male-dominated field. The interviewer, a sharp-eyed woman with a reputation for asking difficult questions, meets me in Cypherloom's conference room. After covering my background and the company's rapid growth, she leans forward with a knowing smile. I have to ask, she says, about the Tide Grove situation. Do you ever regret taking such a hard line walking away from a successful product just weeks before launch? Some might see it as extreme. I consider the question carefully, thinking about the sleepless nights, the legal battles, the uncertainty of starting over. Then I smile. They thought they fired me, I tell her. Turns out, they just unplugged their own system. And no, I don't regret it for a moment. In security, compromise isn't an option. As the words leave my mouth, I realize they've become something of a personal mantra. In a world where corners are routinely cut and vulnerabilities are discovered only after breaches occur, standing firm on principles isn't extreme, it's essential. The interview concludes, and I walk the journalist out to the elevator. As the doors close between us, she gives me a final, appraising look. For what it's worth, she says, I think you did the right thing. The doors slide shut, and I'm left standing in the hallway, reflecting on the path that led me here. From Tide Grove's corner office to Cypherloom's bustling headquarters, from a system I had to protect by taking it back to one I'm building with a team that shares my vision. They thought they fired me. What they really did was set me free. And that has made all the difference. The conference hall buzzes with energy as I step onto the stage, the spotlight momentarily blinding me. The audience falls silent, 3,000 faces turned expectantly toward me. This is TechSecure, the largest cybersecurity conference in North America. And I've been invited as the keynote speaker. 5 years have passed since I walked out of Tide Grove with my encryption key. 5 years since I founded Cypherloom. 5 years of building, growing, and proving that security and success aren't mutually exclusive. Good morning, I begin, my voice steady despite the flutter of nervousness in my stomach. Public speaking still doesn't come naturally to me, but I've learned to embrace the discomfort. Some messages are too important to remain unspoken. My name is Isla Warren, and I'm here to talk about ethics in technology. The presentation that follows isn't about Tide Grove, not directly. It's about the choices we make as engineers, as companies, as an industry. It's about the responsibility that comes with building systems that hold people's financial futures, their personal information, their trust. But the Tide Grove story serves as a powerful backdrop, a case study in what happens when business priorities override security concerns. Over the years, it's become something of a cautionary tale in tech circles, taught in business schools as an example of how not to handle security architecture and intellectual property. After my keynote, a line forms at the side of the stage, people waiting to ask questions, share their own stories, or simply shake my hand. Among them, I notice a familiar face, Rachel Ling, Tidegrove's former head of product management, who had been one of the few to support me during the final standoff. "That was brilliant," she says when she reaches me, pulling me into a quick hug. "And long overdue. The industry needs more voices like yours." We step aside to talk more privately, catching up on the years since we last worked together. Rachel left Tidegrove shortly after I did, joining a smaller fintech startup that valued her product vision. "Did you hear about Brent?" she asks, lowering her voice slightly. I shake my head. After leaving Tidegrove, I'd made a point of not following his career. Some chapters are better left closed. "He's at Vertex Capital now," she tells me. "Tried the same playbook, pushing for faster releases, cutting security testing, only this time, it backfired spectacularly. They had a major breach last quarter, customer data everywhere, the stock tanked, and he was out within a week. The news doesn't bring me any satisfaction. Security breaches aren't victories. They're failures that affect real people, whose information is exposed, whose trust is violated. That's unfortunate," I say simply. "For everyone involved." Rachel nods, understanding the weight behind my words. We talk a bit longer before she has to leave for another session, promising to stay in touch this time. As the conference continues, I find myself drawn into conversations with young engineers, particularly women just starting their careers in cybersecurity. They ask for advice, for mentorship, for stories about how I navigated the often challenging terrain of tech leadership. I tell them what I wish someone had told me, that their technical instincts matter, that standing firm on security isn't being difficult, it's being responsible, that sometimes the hardest path is the right one. On the final evening of the conference, I'm approached by a man in his early 60s, distinguished-looking with silver hair and clear, intelligent eyes. He introduces himself as Dr. James Foster, the newly appointed Chief Technology Officer of the Federal Reserve's Digital Currency Initiative. "Ms. Warren," he says, extending his hand, "your keynote was extraordinary. I wonder if you might have time for a conversation about the security architecture for a project we're developing." The project, as he outlines it over dinner, is nothing short of revolutionary. A government-backed digital currency with unprecedented security requirements. They need someone who understands both the technical challenges and the ethical implications. Someone with a proven track record of prioritizing security over expediency. "We followed your work at CipherLoom with great interest," Dr. Foster tells me. "Your decentralized encryption model could be the foundation for something truly groundbreaking." It's an intriguing proposition, one that would take CipherLoom in a direction I hadn't anticipated but find incredibly compelling. By the time we part ways, we've sketched the outlines of a potential partnership that could change the landscape of digital currency. Back in my hotel room, I find myself standing at the window, looking out at the city lights stretching to the horizon. From this height, they remind me of circuit boards, interconnected nodes of light forming patterns too complex to fully comprehend from any single vantage point. My phone chimes with an incoming email. It's from Marcus, a response to the quarterly industry newsletter I send out discussing emerging security trends. His message is brief. "You were right about everything. The industry is better because you stood your ground." I smile, appreciating the acknowledgement, but knowing it isn't about being right. It's about doing right by the users who trust our systems, by the principles that guide our work, by the future we're collectively building. Tomorrow, I'll fly back to Denver, to CipherLoom's headquarters where my team is waiting. We'll begin exploring Dr. Foster's proposal, mapping out the security architecture for a system that could potentially serve millions. And I'll do it the same way I've done everything since walking away from Tidegrove, without compromise, without shortcuts, with an unwavering commitment to security first. They thought they fired me. What they really did was launch me toward a future I couldn't have imagined, one where standing firm on principles isn't career suicide, but the very foundation of success. In the reflection of the window, I see myself smile. The path hasn't been easy, but it has been right. And in the end, that's all that matters. The boardroom at Cypherloom falls silent as I finish presenting our quarterly security audit. 12 faces look back at me, our investors, advisors, and executive team, expressions ranging from impressed to concerned. So you're saying? Samuel Kwan, our lead investor, begins carefully. That you've identified a potential vulnerability in our own system. One that hasn't been exploited, but could be. I nod, meeting his gaze directly. Yes. During our routine penetration testing, we discovered a subtle flaw in how our authentication system handles certain edge cases. It's complex, deeply buried, and would be extremely difficult for an outside actor to find or exploit, but it exists, and therefore, it needs to be fixed. What's the timeline on that? Asks Miranda Jimenez, our chief operating officer and one of my most trusted colleagues. 3 weeks for a complete overhaul, I reply. We'll need to take the system offline for approximately 6 hours during the final implementation. A murmur runs through the room. Taking our system offline, even briefly, means inconveniencing clients, risking transaction delays, potentially losing revenue. Can we patch it instead? Samuel suggests, a targeted fix that wouldn't require downtime. The question hangs in the air, and for a moment, I'm transported back 7 years to that glass-walled conference room at Tide Grove, with Brent Holloway suggesting we cut the security testing to meet a deadline. But this isn't Tide Grove, and Samuel isn't Brent. When I founded Cypherloom, I built a culture where security comes first, always. It's in our mission statement, our hiring practices, our daily operations. Everyone in this room knows that. We could, I acknowledge, but a patch would be treating the symptom, not the cause. The root issue is in the architecture of that particular module, and it needs to be rebuilt properly. I pause, looking around the table. When I started this company, I made a promise to our clients, to our team, to myself that we would never compromise on security. Not for convenience, not for cost, not for anything. That's why people trust us with their financial data. That's why we've never had a breach. The room is quiet again, but it's a different kind of silence, thoughtful, respectful. Miranda speaks first. I'll coordinate with the client services team to plan the downtime for minimum impact. We'll be transparent with our clients about what we're doing and why. Samuel nods his agreement. 3 weeks it is. Do it right. The meeting moves on to other topics, but that moment stays with me. It's a reminder of how far I've come, how far we've all come, in creating a company where security isn't something to fight for. It's the foundation everything else is built upon. Later that afternoon, I'm in my office reviewing the technical specifications for the authentication system rebuild when my assistant alerts me to an unexpected visitor. There's a Ms. Reeves here to see you, she says. She doesn't have an appointment, but she's quite insistent. The name doesn't immediately register until I look up and see her standing in my doorway, Sarah Reeves, Tide Grove's current Chief Information Security Officer. I haven't spoken to anyone from Tide Grove, except, occasionally, Marcus, in years. Isla, she says, her expression a mix of determination and what might be embarrassment. I apologize for dropping in like this, but I need to speak with you privately. I gesture for her to come in, curious despite myself. Sarah takes a seat across from me, straight-backed and professional, but with an undercurrent of tension I can sense immediately. Tide Grove has experienced a security incident, she says without preamble. A sophisticated attack that targeted specifically the parts of our system that were built after you left the replacements for your encryption architecture. I keep my expression neutral, waiting for her to continue. The breach was contained before any customer data was compromised, she clarifies quickly. But it was close, too close, and it exposed fundamental weaknesses in the system we built to replace yours. Now I understand why she's here. You want my help? It's not a question, but she nods anyway. Yes. Not to rebuild what you originally created, we know that's proprietary to you now. But as a consultant, to help us design something new, something secure, the irony isn't lost on either of us. 7 years ago, Tidegrove demoted me for insisting on proper security testing. Now they're asking for my expertise to fix the very problems that testing might have prevented. Why not use one of the major security consulting firms? I ask, genuinely curious. There are plenty that could help you rebuild. Sarah holds my gaze steadily. Because none of them are you. None of them understand our system, our challenges, the way you do, and none of them have your track record. It's a flattering assessment, but not one that automatically sways me. Tidegrove is part of my past, a chapter I closed definitively when I founded Cypherloom. I appreciate your directness, I tell her, but my focus is here now, on Cypherloom and our clients. I understand, she says, though disappointment flickers across her face. But I want you to know that Tidegrove has changed since you left. The security culture has evolved. What happened with Brent Holloway? She hesitates. The company learned from that mistake. I consider her words, thinking about the path that led me here, about second chances and growth and the possibility of positive change, even in institutions that once failed. I can't take on a full consulting role, I say finally. But I could review your proposed architecture, provide recommendations, a limited engagement. The relief on her face is immediate and genuine. That would be incredibly valuable. Isla, thank you. As we discuss the parameters of this limited arrangement, I reflect on the strange circularity of the situation. 7 years ago, I walked away from Tidegrove to protect my principles and my code. Now, I'm agreeing to help them build something better, not out of obligation or residual loyalty, but because security matters everywhere, not just in my own company. After Sarah leaves, I stand by the window of my office, looking out at the Denver skyline, the same view I had from Tidegrove, but from a different building, a different perspective, a different position of strength. My phone buzzes with a message from Miranda. Security team assembled for the authentication rebuild. Ready when you are. I smile, turning away from the window. The past has its place, but the future is where the real work happens. And there's always more work to do in building systems people can trust. They thought they fired me. What they really did was set in motion a chain of events that transformed not just my career, but the way an entire industry thinks about security. And that's a legacy worth building on, one secure system at a time. 10 years after leaving Tidegrove, I find myself in a small buzz-seer private ceremony at the Cybersecurity Excellence Awards, accepting the Lifetime Achievement Award, an honor that feels premature given that I'm only 44 but deeply meaningful nonetheless. The citation reads, "For unwavering commitment to security principles, for founding Cypherloom and revolutionizing secure payment processing, and for mentoring the next generation of women in cybersecurity." As I look out at the audience, I see faces that span my entire career, former colleagues from Tidegrove, including Marcus, who nods respectfully from the third row, my team from Cypherloom, who cheer perhaps a bit too enthusiastically, students from the Cypherloom Fellowship Program, which provides scholarships and mentoring for women pursuing degrees in cybersecurity. This industry, I begin my acceptance speech, has a complicated relationship with principles. We talk about security as a priority. But, too often, it's sacrificed for speed, for convenience, for quarterly results. I pause, feeling the weight of a decade of experience, of battles won and lost, of systems built and rebuilt. 10 years ago, I was faced with a choice: sign off on a system I knew wasn't ready, or walk away from years of work. I chose to walk away. It wasn't easy. It wasn't comfortable, but it was right. The room is silent, attentive. These are people who understand the pressures, the compromises, the constant push to deliver faster, cheaper, now. That decision cost a company a $120 million launch in the short term. But in the long term, it saved them from something far worse, a breach that could have destroyed not just revenue, but trust. And trust? once lost, is nearly impossible to rebuild. I go on to talk about CipherLoom's journey, about the community of security-focused engineers we've built, about the changes I've seen in the industry's approach to security over the past decade. Positive changes, many of them, though still not enough. After the ceremony, at the reception that follows, I find myself in conversation with a young engineer who recently joined the CipherLoom Fellowship program. Her name is Maya, and she reminds me of myself at her age, brilliant, determined, uncompromising in her technical standards. I've read everything I could find about the Tide Grove incident, she tells me, a hint of awe in her voice. It's why I applied to the fellowship. I want to learn how to stand my ground like that. I smile, appreciating her enthusiasm, but knowing there's more to the story than the near-mythic version that's been passed around in tech circles over the years. Standing your ground is important, I tell her. But so is building systems where that isn't constantly necessary, where security is the default, not the exception you have to fight for. She nods thoughtfully, and I can see her processing this, integrating it into her developing professional identity. That's why I founded CipherLoom. I continue. Not just to build secure systems myself, but to create an environment where everyone is empowered to prioritize security, where no one has to choose between doing what's right and keeping their job. As I speak, I notice Marcus approaching, a glass of champagne in hand. He's aged well over the past decade, though there's more silver in his hair than when we first met. Congratulations, Idla, he says, raising his glass in a small toast. Well deserved. Thank you, Marcus, I reply, then turn to Maya. Maya, this is Marcus Tidwell, CEO of Tide Grove Systems. Marcus, Maya Chen, one of our most promising fellows. They shake hands, and I see the moment Maya connects the name to the story she's heard. To her credit, she maintains her composure, though her eyes widen slightly. Mr. Tidwell, she says, I've studied your company's security evolution over the past decade. The transformation has been remarkable. Marcus smiles, but there's a hint of something deeper in his expression, acknowledgement, perhaps, of the long and sometimes painful road that led to that transformation. It has been, he agrees, though not without its challenges. Sometimes the most valuable lessons are the ones that come at the highest cost. Our eyes meet briefly over Maya's head, a moment of shared understanding passing between us. We were once adversaries, briefly enemies, and now, not friends, exactly, but people who respect each other's journeys, who recognize that we both contributed to something important. Later, as the evening winds down and guests begin to depart, I find myself alone on the venue's terrace, looking out at the city lights. The cool night air is a welcome respite after the warmth and noise of the reception. The door behind me opens, and I turn to see Dr. James Foster, now the recognized authority on secure digital currency systems, with whom CipherLoom has collaborated extensively over the years. Quite a night, he says, joining me at the railing, though I've always found it strange to celebrate people for simply doing what's right. I laugh softly. I know what you mean. Standing firm on security principles shouldn't be exceptional enough to warrant an award. And yet, here we are, he observes, because it is exceptional, still, though less so than when you walked out of Tide Grove with your encryption key. We stand in companionable silence for a moment, both contemplating how far the industry has come and how far it still has to go. I'm retiring next year, he tells me finally. The digital currency project is stable, secure, successful. It's time for new blood, new perspectives. I nod, understanding the impulse. We've both been fighting the same battles for a long time. Any plans? I ask. Some teaching, perhaps, some writing. He pauses, turning to face me directly. And I've been asked to chair the National Commission on Cybersecurity Standards. I'd like you to consider joining as a commissioner. The offer takes me by surprise. The commission is a high-profile, politically sensitive role that would put me at the center of national policy decisions about security standards across industries. That's a significant ask, I say carefully. It is, he agrees. But your voice is needed there, Ely, your experience, your perspective, your unwillingness to compromise on what matters. The stakes are only getting higher. He's right about that. As technology becomes more integrated into every aspect of our lives, the security implications grow exponentially. The vulnerabilities are no longer just about financial data or personal information, they're about critical infrastructure, democratic processes, public safety. I'll think about it, I promise him. After he leaves, I remain on the terrace a bit longer, considering the path that brought me here and the choices that lie ahead. From a demoted engineer walking away from Tide Grove with my encryption key to a potential commissioner shaping national security policy, it's not a journey I could have predicted. But then, the most important journeys rarely are. They thought they fired me. What they really did was launch me on a path that would change not just my life, but the security landscape itself. And 10 years later, I'm still just getting started.